Okay, everybody, once again, hello from King's College. A word from our sponsor, campus setup at King's College, Seminary President Michael Wieteska, Cairns, Dean of the Graduate School of Theology, Preecha, Jengjalern, Chiang Mai, and myself, Head of College, Gerard Seow in Singapore. Just a little introduction on this second session. The 7 Modalities program provides the tools, frameworks, and theories to help participants understand the world better, discover the program designed to help gifted individuals to discover genius, learn how this journey transformed the lives of many others through modalities, become awake and again curious and aware of what's going on. Executive summary. Raising productivity in the workforce is critical as we equip you through the 7 modalities paradigm. These are trade secrets closely guarded by experts, now made available to anyone with ears to hear. The world is hurtling through catastrophic change, but those aligned to these principles will do exploits. Who should attend? Firefighters, policemen, paramedics, anyone in loss protection or entering the danger zone on a daily basis. We've trained national swimmers and track and field athletes, artists, politicians, people at the law gate, people at the family gate, change agents on the front lines of pain, tragedy, and sorrow. We've seen healthy and happy students as well as motivated many second halfers to consider afresh what makes life worth living. Why is tomorrow better than yesterday? You can begin anew through self-awareness and gain self-mastery of the elementals to answer the call. Register yourself in the description below and get ready to run to the battle. Why are we sharing this now? The signs are clear. The phenomena of work from home, mass resignation, the gig economy, and the global boom in online coaching, trading, cryptocurrency are telltale signs that seismic transformations are afoot. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. Who are we? 7 modalities represented in 4 unpacked to impact digital municipalities: Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, and their respective micro hinterlands, as we discuss critical issues to academia, in the workplace, and the public square. Many are holding our sleeve, wanting to walk with us. They want to know the truth about the wars and rumors of wars, motivations behind land grabbing and medical tyranny. So our cohorts are full. One of our students confessed, the well is deep and I don't have anything to draw with. So sign up, elohimthinkofit.com. 7modalities.com is our website. So we're going to flip over now to the slide presentation for session 2 in our King's College Modalities for Life series. This is a new video series, a total of 7 with an epilogue. And as these individual titles come out, today's will be entitled The Elemental You, The Elemental You. And so as we swim through the various, the content, we've updated some of the content since our pre-COVID presentations and even during our Zoom presentations. The elemental you in your modal excellence depends upon 7, the pattern of 7 that I shared in session 1. Let's take a look carefully at each of these different color bands or different characteristics. We call them archetypes. And the reason why I am presenting them to you in their original language in Greek, Greek of the 1st century, Koine Greek, is because as you bring this material out to your communities in the different language groups that we represent across the different time zones, we want you to get as close to the original understanding of these archetypes as possible, although there is a gap of time, from the time that Moses explained them 5,000 years ago or more to the time of Jesus 2,000 years ago. And in between, where Solomon expresses this, David expresses this, and the prophets and so on and so forth. And even after the New Testament church, after the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, you have these different expressions still living and organic within the early church. So how we define it is important. I'll give a little footnote. In the little footnote there, you can see next to the first archetype, I put there futurist. That'll sort of, that's just my own little attempt at trying to sort of hone in on one of the essential aspects. It's not the only one, but it's sort of a distinctive flavor of the prophetia. It's one of 7 mentioned in Romans chapter 12, verse 6 to 8, which is a kind of a foundational scripture found in Apostle Paul's writing to the book of Romans, describing the glory of the Father, the sevenfold glory of the Father given to man, regardless of race, language, or religion. It's given to mankind to put food on your table, for you to express your creativity and discover the world, discover yourself, discover your marriage, and the work that you would do, right? So one of these 7, you can really describe it as the person who has this futuristic view. And if you look at and compare with the revelation given to Peter in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3 to 7, you find that arate is the Greek word. It's really the English word doesn't really give the fullness of that, the fullness of that idea, but the idea is there. That there is a blueprint, there's a future, there is a future truth or a future reality that we have been designed to move toward, and that everyone recognizes as something that is good and perfect in the sight of God. Regardless of where we are right now, regardless of our experience of the world, the bitterness that we may have in our heart, or the trauma as a result of any, all kinds of, the way that life has dealt, your hand, so to speak, regardless of the cards that you've been dealt with, there is a reality that tomorrow is always better than yesterday, that we're always moving towards a teleological teleos, the idea that where we are now is not where we will be. Where we are now, thank God, we're not where we were, right? We're not where we were, but thank God for that. But also we're not where we ought to be. There's always a divine ought, and the prophetia can see this future. And when you redeem this gift, you realize that if you go back into primeval history, theology talks about different stages of history. And in primeval history, that means in the history of going back to the earliest experience of anthropos in Adam and Eve in the garden, you find that this was the state in which the first man was created. He was created in arate, in virtue. He was given 7 what we call natural endowments or birthright gifts. This is the first of them. That means when God finished creating Adam and Eve, he said, it is good. It is very good. Not their behavior, but the fact that they were created by God and the breath of the Spirit into the nostrils. As God blew life into Adam, he blew in these 7 natural endowments. It didn't make him perfect, because if you go back to the scripture in 2 Peter chapter 1, he says, add to your faith these 7 things. To your faith, add arate, or virtue. Add virtue. That means Adam was created perfect. He was created good. The creation of God is very good. The problem is that he did not add to his faith virtue. He was created in virtue, but you can add to what is elemental. You can go back to God. So he should have gone back to God and said, hey, what's this demonic snake-looking serpent that's talking to my wife? And as though he really knows you, God. Who's this guy? So if Adam had only gone back to the Creator and verified and authenticated with God, he would have known that this guy is a phony, he's a fake, he's a counterfeit. He's an anti-God, antichrist figure, with beastly intentions and speaking with the mouth of a false prophet, right? If only he had gone back to God. So if you look further in Solomon, you'll find that the 7 seasons of a man's life is broken up according to 28 kairotic moments, or moments in time, chronos, that come upon a man 28 times. That means he mentions the word kairos in Ecclesiastes, this king, King Solomon, son of David. He mentions kairos 28 times in 8 verses in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, but he only mentions chronos once. It's very interesting that it's almost as though you could say that it's almost as though you could say that there's a plan. There's something of a plan that these 28 moments in a man's life is already prearranged. And, he has the whole world in his hands, as it were. This, we call it the season of discovery. And it usually corresponds to the earlier parts of your development. And it also implies that there is almost like a schedule, a heavenly schedule that layers, that develops in your life, layer by layer. And this is the first layer, as it were, virtue, or the New Testament word that is being used of the person, the gift or the genius of this kind of person is the futurist, the prophetia. So that's the first one, and we've put it in purple. Throughout the whole training, we will stick to these conventions: purple, blue, orange, green, pink, steel, and red. Let's go on to the second one, diakonia. And again, in the footnote, I have mentioned here the word executionist in the sense of implementing, an expert at implementing or execution. There are many, many people who are really good at executing a plan, a script, and a score. For example, athletes and musicians and commercial airline pilots, they follow a flight plan. Astronauts, they follow a very, very detailed plan. And they even have plans in case the first plan, plan A doesn't work out, they have plan B. And in case plan B doesn't work out, they have plan C, and all the way to X, Y, and Z. So these are almost artisanal types of people, celebrities. They become very famous on the media for their almost superpowers, feats of, kinesthetic abilities. This is really the gift of the hand, right? And in the original sequence, right at the very beginning of the Bible, you get the creation of Adam and Eve. And this is the second natural endowment that is given to Adam. And the understanding here is knowledge of God, that there was something in the original creation that is innate or indigenous to mankind, even in the tribes, a knowledge of the supernatural, that he does exist and that he rewards us according to our deeds. In the revelation that King Solomon gives over in Ecclesiastes, you begin to, in verse 1, he says there's a time and a season for every activity under heaven. And then in verse 2, he goes on and he defines that first season of discovery, right? But then in verse 3, he goes on to this season of service, and he begins to show that out of this innate knowledge of God, we begin to follow the plan that God has already for our lives. Those who can lock on to that plan begin to understand that we have been put on earth for a purpose. And once we discover what that purpose is, it acts, as it were, as a plan that brings us to places that we never imagined we could go. And so in this second season of a man's life, it's comprised of the idea of service, whether it's what kind of service is. It could be serving at home, your mother, your father. It could be serving national service or whatever kinds of different service that you have. But this is really another layer of the development of the gifts that God has input or imputed into natural man. And this is where we understand the goodness of man, that he was created good, that he has the potential. Let me put it this way. He has the potential of doing great good. And he has been equipped with virtue. Now, how do you get the child, or how do you get the teenager to be turned on to his better side in his better moments? How do you do that? That is called the art of parenting. And how do you speak the words that encourage that child away from toward the natural proclivity of doing good things through positive reinforcement and so on and so forth. So virtue and knowledge are sort of the beginnings of an awakening within the soul. If there is truth, if there is this understanding of this paradigm that somehow or other our future is kind of dependent on us executing and going through the plan that, and to execute the plan, or what we call the will of God. So obedience is central, right? I mean, it's not just knowing what to do, but actually executing on that knowledge. So this knowledge is not just theoretical or academic or head knowledge, but it's really the knowledge that we obtain when we obey, upon obedience, upon the execution or the delivery of the service to whomever, to mankind, in our family, to our children, as a husband or as a wife, or as a citizen of a country. Okay, so let's move on to the orange. Then we have the didactic gift. And in the footnote, you can see here the core idea is that of an essentialist, because there are some people who have this logical, mathematical, organized way of thinking about ideas and categorizing them and sorting through ideas and putting everything in its place, like a teacher. And of course, not every teacher is like this. Otherwise, we wouldn't come out of school hating some of the teachers, because maybe they were leaders or administrators or whatever. But there are some that are able to bring a person. Again, it's not just content, but it's content that brings a person to control oneself. This idea of self-control is the goal or the mission of the teacher, and the result of having gone through a season of learning properly. So when we say self-control and we link it to teaching, we can see here it's quite useless, isn't it? If you go into a classroom and the children are crawling all over the teacher's head and there's no discipline, then something is wrong with that curriculum. Or something is wrong with the philosophy of learning in that particular school. Or if the teacher has to be screaming and shouting and using a ruler or slapping or using violence against the students, something is wrong, systemically wrong about the education system if you don't have quiet in a class. Not because the teacher is so fierce and beats you into submission, but because the content is so riveting that the children want to switch off their handphones and they want to listen and they want to grow and they want to be like the teacher. That's the goal of teaching. It's impartation to the next generation, but you can't impart something that you don't have. And that's the problem with the present day education system. Is really broken. It's because the teachers themselves are not taught. They themselves have self-control. So how can you impart that? That's the very basic, right? So what is at the essential core of what we need to know? This is the domain of the didasco, what we call the didasco. And it produces tremendous results in society where you have great control. not external control, but inside. That means the policeman is inside of you, watching you, guiding you. So even if nobody's looking, there's still that pursuit of the truth and of improved living and clearer thinking, clarity of thought. That's what didactic gift is all about. Okay, next is the green band. And that is, you can see here, the word in Greek is parakleo. And the footnote, you take a look, it's really, you could say it either conversationalist, but really it's a potentialist. And this is the principal idea that Adam was created good. Adam and Eve, the first couple in the garden, they were given 7 natural endowments. The fourth of these 7 is perseverance or patience. And really this is the corresponding idea in Solomon is that of a season of enabling. Enabling here meaning encouraging or scaffolding or coaching, coming alongside. That's the literal word, called alongside, parakaleo. That idea of edification, of being called alongside to harness the potential of a particular person. Usually, counselors and coaches, they do this by asking the right question and teasing out the why behind behavior. Why do you want to get an A in your studies? Why do you want to be promoted or get married or have children, etc.? And with patience and with perseverance, you can really mold. You can see character can be molded. So man was created good, but you need to add to your self-control, Peter said, to your faith, add virtue. To your virtue, add knowledge. To your knowledge, add self-control. To your self-control, add perseverance. So we were created good, but we need to go back to God time and time again for us to fully realize our potential. And of course, as this becomes a practice in our lives, we can help other people. That's, in fact, the genius of the paraclectic gift, the ability to come alongside and really, say, wow, every soul is ordained for greatness. Every community can bless God and flourish. Okay, so we now move to the pink band. And this, in the Greek, it's called metadidomi. So meta is sort of overarching, right? Meta as in a meta-narrative. But didomi means to give. So the idea here is not to give money alone, but it's to give shape to something. And really, if you compare Paul with Peter, with Solomon, for example, that's what we're doing in this particular spreadsheet. You can see the connection, isn't it? Because the economist, which is what essentially a metadidomi is, he or she is in the sort of control tower of life. Airport, there are many moving parts to an airport, but every moving part must submit to a sort of a management system, and it's visibly known as a tower control, right? Whether it's planes coming in or going out on the ground, everything that moves on the tarmac must be tracked and monitored. All traffic. Now, you can see that connection in the idea that Peter has in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 5 to 7, when he mentions this 5th component that we are to add to our patience. We are to add godliness. Godliness is not just, kind of a superficial, do-good religious thing. Godliness is actually at the DNA level of how the world is ordered and pleases God. I mean, you just have to see this in a busy city, let's say a metropolis like Singapore. If you were to remove suddenly, all of a sudden, you were to remove all the traffic lights, or all the lines on the roads were to be removed. People would, of course, they would adjust, but it would cause quite a chaotic traffic system, because no one would know. Everybody wants to go first, right? So then you will see the true level of godliness in a city, right? And if you knock out the control tower, you're going to have a problem at a busy airport, isn't it? Or if all the people suddenly they fell asleep, or they had too much for lunch, and then they just slept for a couple of hours, then you will find how chaotic the management of the airport would be, and how dangerous, right? You would have metal raining down because planes will be crashing into each other. Same thing. So when we talk about godliness, don't think of it as goody two-shoes, like doing good, that's giving money to charity. Godliness is really structural. And that's why Solomon speaks about this season of structuring and restructuring. And this is one of the layers. And of course, if you divide up the seasons into 10 years each, 10 or 20 years each, approximately, let's say if you live to 70 years, there are 7 seasons, right? Or you live to 120 years, right? Or over 100 years. If you just approximately look at these different layers and put maybe 10 years or 15 years to each, then you can see that, as a child, you have this season of discovery. Then as a teenager, service orientation, and then, going into your 20s and 30s, it's that season of learning and, of course, academic, but all kinds of learning, right? It could be an apprenticeship or something like that. And then as you get into your 40s and 50s, you see that it's an opportunity where you're tested, isn't it? To whether you're able to encourage other people in their season of discovery and service and learning, right? So to bring up the bring up the rear, as it were, and you have this opportunity to encourage other people. And as the scripture says, the more you water others will water you. So it comes back to you, right? And then as you move into your 50s and 60s, is really a lot of restructuring, whether it's in midlife crisis and you change of career switching, or whatever it is, reskilling, retooling. But really, I mean, most of the divorces in the world, they come during this time of restructuring, because it's like suddenly, you start to streamline, you start to think things, but maybe you don't see a bigger picture beyond just yourself, right? So remember, it's all about you, but you are not what it's all about. So you can't be selfish in this. You have to see it from the perspective of God and how He has calibrated society and marriage, monogamy, right? This one man, one woman thing. But the idea of godliness being one of the strategic bands or gifts or endowments, then you can really see the role and place of the genius of the metadynamic genius, the economist, the genius of organizing, a place for everything and everything in its place, especially resources, things to do with stewarding resources. That's what godliness is really about. Godliness is not a religious thing. It's in every facet of life, finances and so on and so forth, relationships and so on. So let's move on to the steel band or the gray band there. The footnote to the Greek word proistemi, it's comprising of two words, pro, which means before. We saw that word in the word prophatia, right? But that means before, you see something before it happens. But the word proistemi, the second part, istemi in Greek, it just means to stand up. So this is the commander kind of band where you stand before other brothers, or you stand before the brothers in order to demonstrate, be an example of kindness, brotherly kindness, to restore the team back. If anything is broken, if anyone is lost. The idea here is that in this season of leadership, especially when you get into your 60s and 70s and so on and so forth, towards the end, this is where, if you've really done your homework, you've really gone through properly season by season, layer by layer, without pushing yourself, without fighting for anything, allowing the seasons, changing, aligning yourself to the different seasons. And then finally, through restructuring as well, finally you come to leadership. That's where doors begin to open for you to be accepted, your leadership to be accepted, because you have this particular, if indeed you do have this proistemic genius, then it would be for you the expansionist genius, because you're constantly pushing out from a core. Not everybody has this. We all lead in different ways, right? But the expansionist just has this natural proclivity. It's not learned in an MBA course or graduate school. It's just the way that you've been born from your mother's womb, okay? And again, it's not the only way that we lead. There's 7 different ways to lead. This is just one way, but it's the most notorious of the 7 because it's so clearly seen in the strongman type of leadership. If it's not redeemed, it can fall very quickly into gangsterism, right? Or Godfather type of, sort of ruling with an iron fist kind of tyrannical leadership to expand. So each of these gifts, they do need to be redeemed. And when you redeem the proistemic genius, what you get is brotherly love. Right? Look at that. If you redeem the prophetic gift, the first one, the purple one, what do you get? You get is virtue, true virtue in the earth and beyond. Right? If you redeem the diaconia, what do you get? You get true knowledge of God and of self. What do you get when you redeem the orange band, the didactic gift? You get self-control in society. What do you get when you redeem the paraclectic gift, right? You get patience and perseverance in the earth. These are all rare metals or rare elements in the periodic table of human behavior. It's all in the earth already. All of these things are already in the earth. They're in society, but they need leadership to bring it out. And that's the reason why when you come to the metadidomy, stewardship, management of resources, equity, and so on and so forth, that's why godliness will come as a result. And then same thing, brotherly kindness will come as a result of good leadership, right? And then finally, in this sort of a diagram, you have the eleemosynary. And by the way, that is a real term. Eleemosynary. That is a real term. So what it is basically the red band. It's colored there because it's the color of blood. And basically at the footnote, you can see here is the interventionist. Okay. And the interventionist, out of all of the 7, is the heart, the gift, the genius of the heart. Not everybody has this, right? And don't feel guilty if you don't have empathy and compassion. It's just the way that we've been designed with this 7 birthright gifts. This one, the Elios, is the one who will intervene when there's pain or suffering. It's quite different from the previous one. That one is very headstrong and clear about the mission, even if people have to suffer, even if people have to be sacrificed. But the eleemosynary gift, he's more the paramedic, he's more of the rescuer. He or she will intervene and protect what is weak and vulnerable, what is exploited, or what needs to be conserved and saved carefully. This is a particular genius that has a little bit of all 7. That means they are like the prophetia in the sense that they can see pain and suffering, right? They are like the diaconia, the blue band here, in the sense that they can execute something, especially in an emergency, right? They are like the teacher in the sense that they can orientate the newbie and the volunteer. They are like the parakleo. The Elios is like the parakleo in the sense that they can actually be a shoulder to cry on, especially for those who are going through trauma. The Elios, they are like the metadidomi in the sense that they can organize and arrange things in order to make way for something else, but perhaps on a more in a way that is meeting an immediate, giving immediate relief to the pain, not necessarily treating the root of it, right? And Elios can lead and will lead if there's nobody else to lead, but generally it's only in the crisis that they're good at leading. So when the Elios is at the top of the game, he or she is able to actually mentor. So that's the difference between the mentor and the coach. We'll deal with all of the differences in a different session, but this is just really to give you the overview of the elemental you, right? In this second series, in this second lecture, we're looking at which of these architects is really elementally yourself. Not a hat that you wear, shoes that you wear. It's not your calling, but it's your gift. Calling is more consequential to the situation and the context that you're in. But gift is more elemental. It's more indigenous to what you are and how you've been designed. Some people are like this. You'll find a lot of Catholic nuns are Elioses. They give up marriage. They give up, go into the monastery or whatever. They dedicate themselves to prayer, good works, teaching, whatever it is, out of a heart of love, right? So for others, a season of compassion will come upon you. But for some who have this genius, they swim in an ocean of compassion all the time. And so they're very empathetic. They're not rushing other people and saying, hurry up, do this. No, they just accept the flow of how things are. And they relax. They're not time bound. How can you be time bound? If you imagine you go to a funeral wake, and you're trying to comfort somebody, but then you keep looking at your watch and, hurry up, tell me, what's your problem? This is not something you learn in a book. This is the DNA of this kind of person. And there are people like this in the world. And, they are, in a sense, in this rescue mode, and they're energized by it. Now, everybody can rescue. Everybody should be able to show love, right? But for others, this compassion is highly draining to people who don't have this natural gift. But if you do have this gift, not only can you go into a crisis and respond to the crisis, but you're actually energized by the crisis. You're not tired. And then after the crisis, you want to go to the next crisis and apply the same principle, right? We in humanitarian work, we call this direct assistance to victims in trauma. So for the Elios, they see the trauma patient as a victim, and they will stand up and speak for the rights of that person, and so on and so forth, if it is a humanitarian issue. Or they will render direct assistance. They will actually give blankets, and like those migrants who get sort of caught up in the middle of somebody else's war, and they don't have a place to stay. They're looking after the needs of this. All right, so when you look at modal excellence, you have to see that that there is a kind of a grid or a pattern within each pattern, and that's what we want to look at now. We want to look at the way in which each of these archetypes interact with each other. How do they, what is their essential flavor? How do they interact with the world? How do they see the future? How do they lead? Each of these, how do they solve problems? How do they learn? How do they, what happens when you get a whole bunch of them together of the same archetype? And then how does that individual archetype recharge oneself? So within each archetype, there are 7 or 8 different aspects, and we'll go through one by one. So let's begin with the prophetia. The good example is Isaac Newton, and you can see here he actually calculated, based on the books of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Revelation, and so on. He actually calculated the eschaton as being roughly in the year 2034. So those of you taking our Kingdom Shifts course by Pastor Paul Koo, you'll find that it's roughly the same time frame, okay? That the world is undergoing a shift very, very soon, and things will be moving into what the Bible calls a millennial age very soon. Now, there were two dates for that, an earlier date and a later date. But that's not the point. The point is that the prophetia, once they see something, they can't help but to broadcast it out. Now, of course, in the case of Copernicus, he was very careful. He managed his blind spot. And he said, look, don't publish my works until the day after I die, because they were very highly controversial. He was actually disputing or repudiating the sort of geocentric theory for a heliocentric theory. So that's one of the key ideas, this ability to decode, define the elemental, and then broadcast it out, okay? And of course, the connecting of the dots, that's really what sets apart this diaconia. It's not through analysis. It's just they know it. They have this prophetic ability, like a radar dish, to lock on and receive signals, as it were. And of course, it needs to be redeemed. Otherwise, you're getting signals from the wrong source, right? So you want to have your signals from the right place. But essentially, it's the gift of the eye. And certain of the wildlife creatures you can see in the wild, they depend very much on this prophetia genius to actually be able to hone in on prey miles away, or, you know, through this gift of perception. And these are the birds of prey, and all their eyes are the ones with the eyes here. If the birds have their eyes here, they're not birds of prey. They're all the birds of prey, the kites and the hawks and so on and so forth, all have their eyes in the front of their face. And guess what? Human beings also, our eyes are here, right? So they're not here. If you have anybody looking with two eyes coming out your ears there, you'd have to worry they're not going to kill you, all right? It's only humans who have eyes in the front. These are the killer species, all right? So what else? The blue ocean idea, the idea that, you know, when you have lots of competition and there's like a hunting season and the whales, you know, and there's blood everywhere, that is, we call it a red ocean. That's not where the prophetia wants to be. The prophetia will swim away from those kinds of highly densely populated situations, and they will go into the wild, into the blue ocean where nobody has been. They go where nobody wants to go. They stay there until, you know, God tells them to leave, and they never ask when that will be. So these missionaries and these pioneers and scientists and, you know, these explorers and adventurers and so on and so forth, they occupy uncontested space. And what do they do there? They re-engineer or reverse engineer stuff. And they see, what could I use this, let's say this medicine, for another purpose? They repurpose solutions that could be good for one set of parameters. And they realize, hey, I could tweak this, or, you know, just sort of recalibrate something that's going to be useful in another situation. That's their genius, actually, their ability to reformat stuff and solve problems that go beyond the obvious. And in the doing of it, they produce new vocabulary. They come out with new terms that nobody understands, and they'll take years, decades to explain this. But of course, that's why you have these scientific societies, right? So that they will encourage you to write it all down, publish papers, and then eventually that very esoteric vocabulary becomes a household word, right? And these breakthrough ideas become commonplace. That's really where you see how prophetess, they're able to push the envelope. Examples of, can you imagine driving a space car out in space? Let's say, for example, having a personal mobility machine that can get you to A to B, in super fast time. Okay, so you derive pleasure in unearthing and uncovering mystery. and proclaiming this to the world. This is the first sort of layer. It's probably most children would go through this, but then some children just never come out of this phase, and if they don't have the aptitude for, or they may have the aptitude of learning, but they're not appreciated. And so you get a lot of geniuses in childhood who have this prophetia, like, Walt Disney. He got his paper for his drawing back, and the comment in the margins was that the art teacher says, look, elephants don't talk. What are you crazy? So if you fund these guys, and if they find their way and have some covering, some sort of guidance and coaching, then they are able to do very innovative, creative kinds of stuff that nobody thought of. They're kind of like fish out of water. They don't fit in, maybe a little bit misfit, but in any case, they're very valuable. Every gift, remember, every soul is ordained for greatness. And when you find the environment that welcomes you, that's why it says, go to where you are celebrated, not where you are tolerated. Okay, so you need to find your element and swim in it. And that's really where you will do super well. Not everybody, however, most people, when they pass through childhood, they leave most of this sort of inquiry, curiosity behind them, simply because they're not good at this. They're not natural at this. They are good at other things. Like, for example, our next archetype we're looking at is the diaconia. If you've seen that movie about Queen Victoria and Abdul, it's sort of a comedy, funny movie, but it's real, right? It actually happened. And in British society, it's funny because today we have a British PM that has an Indian descent, right? And in this movie, you have this, 100 years ago, at the turn of the century, Queen Victoria had this very masterful sort of bodyguard who taught her Urdu, the Pakistani national language, taught her how to make curry and appreciate all things Pakistani / from the Indian subcontinent. And of course, what is this archetype? Is the person who serves, it's service, right? But it's with excellence. And the Greek word is diakonia. And if you look at, for example, characteristics, okay, let's go through the characteristics. The first one is like this commercial airline pilot. I'm going to make a difference between a commercial airline pilot and a fighter pilot later on. But this one flies according to the book, exactly according to the plan, in the middle of a storm, and lands the plane safely at 3 o'clock in the morning or 2 a.m. in the morning, perfectly in the middle of a typhoon or whatever, and everybody applauds, because this is the aspect, the artisanal aspect that exceeds expectations and really wows the fans. When you send a crew of astronauts into space, you're going to make sure that they are fully equipped and trained and have every single bit of training that they need to face and anticipate future needs. And so the diaconia has this almost obsession about getting it right. And this is the 10,000 hour rule that is spoken of in athletes, like those who swing the golf club, early in the morning, 4 a.m. in the morning or whatever, 5 a.m. in the morning, they get ready and they practice the swing or whatever it is immediately after winning the pro golf tournament on the very next day. There are these, basketball players artists and singers, and they're in the studio. I mean, painters, right? Who didn't even know that COVID was a thing, since they work from home all the time. Most people who work from home didn't know anyway, right? They were just so artistically focused on their craft and making it better and better and pursuing it. They're really like master craftsmen of every sort, athletes. You can see this, that you remember the famous story, Chariots of Fire. And every athlete also needs to have a coach. And we'll talk about this coaching later on. But focus right now on the diakonia. It's this kinesthetic gift of the hand, or the ability to manipulate the hand, the body in such a way that really is flexible and super responsive to the situation, whether you're talking about a rugby player, whether you're talking about, anything to do with things that require practice over and again. For example, the patisserie, the master, pastry maker, or the chocolatier. Those that have this artisanal or artisanal quality about their product. Usually it's a product or a service or a good of some sort. That's why you pay for GST, I suppose, goods and service tax, right? So it's something to do with a service that they perform at the highest level. And even in terms of competition, you have this, the America's Cup and so on and so on. The way that they, not just the design of the boat, but also the craft of winning, of competing in order to win, and doing whatever it takes in order to be number one. And it's not relegated, even among the handicapped people. There you find this, sort of Special Olympics. You have the same modality of these people who have this sort of thoughtful, intentional plan. They stick to the plan, they create the plan, they don't move from it every 4 years, and so on and so forth. All right. So next, we move on to the didasco. Now, in the case of the didasco, we can see here that it's all about stunning simplicity. And as we said earlier, this ability to impart to the next generation and produce the future leaders, right? Who are filled with understanding of knowledge, but knowledge that is useful, that produces self-control. Okay, and how this happens is through this ability to take multiple objects or multiple things, all the moving parts, and synthesize something into something that is a meta narrative or a grand narrative that you could not do with only one aspect. So let's say you have only one ball. Well, you couldn't produce that effect of having 3 balls, or in modalities, we juggle with 7, right? A pattern of 7. But being able to break it down into its constituent parts, and then it takes a certain kind of a logic. It takes a certain kind of a mindset to categorize and sort through and be able to bring the student or the project through the certain gates of understanding, as it were, and to establish these pillars so that the whole house can rest on it. And, you'll see this encyclopedic knowledge, or this sort of comprehensiveness that produces power or voltage, if you like, through disambiguation. If you look at this word, most people learn the word disambiguation from the online encyclopedia called Wikipedia, right? We all learned what it meant to disambiguate. That means to make clear. And in fact, that's why people say knowledge is power. To a certain extent, it's true, in the sense that when something becomes clear, crystal clear, then it becomes useful. And when something becomes useful, it becomes ubiquitous. That means everybody grabs hold of that, and it sets people free, right? That's why Jesus said the truth shall set you free. It's the teachers that are able to disambiguate dogma, doctrine, and so on and so forth, and clarify the muddy waters, and map out a route for the future. Okay, so that's really the archetype of the didasco. We've colored it in orange, and it's really being able to, as it were, put on a pair of spectacles to correct our myopia, right? Or whatever. It corrects the vision. And through this stunning clarity, right? And in simplicity, it brings about a total change of heart and mind. And it begins in the heart. It begins in the mind. And then it advances forward in society. And that's why it needs to be redeemed. And you find that any organization that has this sort of teachers, this kind of component, didactic component, it's one of three highly sophisticated skill sets in any organization. If you have this orange band, and this next one as well, the parakleo. The parakleo is different from the teacher in the sense that it uses the this genius in integrating stories, either from another time or from previous experiences, to teach through listening and through interaction and through conversation. The potential of the person can come out. I think most people know the name Nick Vujicic, but did you know that he's actually an evangelist? He is a non-Levitical evangelist. He's a marketplace. And if you listen to him, you know that you just cry at one moment and you laugh at the next moment. And you realize, gosh, if this guy can make it in the world, so can I. You know, I've got 2 arms and 2 legs. What's wrong with me, right? This guy doesn't have any arms and legs. And he says, you know, no worries, right? And so the paraclectic genius is centered around the ability of the tongue to communicate, to ask the right questions, and integrate new ideas in a way that is constructive and edifying, and widening the inner circle through fresh ideas that sort of flow together, as it were, multiple streams integrated into one. And everything's done with a smile. Okay, there's a winsomeness about the paraclectic, the person with this genuine innate gift. But you can use these gifts, you can learn these gifts too, and use them as hats or wear them as shoes as the context requires you. So instead of being confrontational all the time, let's say that is your style, but you can learn, you can correct that, you can augment your leadership style through humor or through seeing the funny side, or being able to integrate another person's idea through dialogue, for example, or being more inclusive in your language. You can learn these things in a book, but there are some people for whom this is second nature. This is their nature. This is part of their nature, the patience and perseverance that they can provoke. As coaches, they make strategic performance coaching a joy. They can take an average or ordinary athlete and then bring them to the next level engagement on competition. They themselves, they may not be, on the front lines, but they know how to get the best out of, the value for your money, so to speak. What essentially they do is that they scaffold, they come around the genius, they develop that genius. And when that genius is successful, the scaffolding comes down. You don't need this coach anymore. And then you can go on to the helping somebody else. Okay. And none of this has to do with money. This is just the way that people are built. There are some people, they have an open door policy, right? Not only is their door open, they unhinge, they take the door off the hinge. So there's no door, right? So some people have this, they're kind of like the switch to the next big thing that's going to happen in society or in the industry. Okay, next, you have this pink band. And this is tower control. This is a very, very serious one, in the sense that all resource and the stewardship of resources, everything, Moses was asked, what is in your hand? That's a metadidymic question. And the answer is somehow always in the house. Whenever God asked Moses, well, the answer was, what is in your hand, right? It's his staff. That means it's already in your hand and you don't have to look for it anywhere. So very often the answer is already in the house. Let's put it that way. All right. And if you know how to plant, or if you know how to invest with what you have, given what you have, when you have it, then that's the secret for living a life of freedom, free from fear. I think that's the main thing. The metadidymy is really a risk. He's really risk averse. They're very safe people. They're very safe and cautious in their outlook. And what they do is they're able to color in and give shape to a project by defining its parameters, right? And being able to, as it were, draw and define and, restructure problems. In fact, there are no problems for a metadidymy in the sense that it's always doable. It's always possible. In a redeemed metadidymic sense, that for example, you don't have to have the, every wife, every housewife, every married woman will know that there must be some control in the household, right? Things cannot be running amok, and then there needs to be some hygiene. There needs to be some order. This is actually the magisterial genius, right? Of sorting and organizing and upscaling to a tipping point where value, what the value of something, 10 years ago, it's going to be very different. In the hands of a metadidymy, value always goes up and up and up. That's the wealth creation aspect of this economist. They're able to steward the future, which is already in hand. And they do this, of course, by being frugal and by being conservative about how everything is being counted and being sorted and being harnessed. How can you harness the capital, including human and talent capital? So these are the managers of these football teams, that trade in the millions and tens of millions for players. They know the value. They're able to take a ragtag group of teenagers and make them World Cup players in the public eye. And so it's a great responsibility. These are the kingmakers. These are the rainmakers. I call them the rainmakers. Metadidomics. They're hidden. They don't say very much. They're not very noisy or verbal at all, but they think. They're at the back. In an unredeemed way, you could say they're kind of like the mafia godfathers who order the execution, all that. They don't do it themselves, but they're behind everything. They run the whole city. They control all the politicians. Everybody is being corrupted by this guy. Well, simply because he's able to manage all the resources, right? Especially land and so on and so on. These are the kingpins in a negative way, in an unredeemed way. In a positive way, of course, you have many examples in the Bible. Boaz is a good example of somebody who knew the value of hard work and consistency of Ruth, for example, and so on. So in short, you could say that the rainmakers, they are sort of making room for God to act. That's what they do best. Rearrange the furniture, making space so that more, the impact can be more can snowball and the value can increase, something like that. Okay, the next area, is that of the proistemi. The proistemi is, as you can see there in the top right-hand corner, the guy with the hard head, and he uses his head to break down barriers and walls. And famous example in South African history or in history of leadership is this guy who actually ran the country from behind bars. And he was in prison, sometimes in solitary confinement, but he's able to run the country. So it's actually, they punch above their weight. And these guys, their interaction with the world is very, very positive. It always can happen. It always can take flight. Their ideas can take flight. They can garner the team together, usually by example. And they can assemble the team. And then they cast the vision. And like this guy, he's got a very, very big signature, right? And they say, go big or go home, right? But whether big or home, they're always going forward. And part of the vocabulary is this idea, they're always using the word going forward. And for some reason, they like to go forward. And whether you go with them or you don't go with them is up to you. But they will tell you where they are going, and they will go whether you go with them or not. That is a proistemic sort of a genius, right? And of course, they inspire people to go with them, of course. And, not just limited to men, but you have some women are designed by design from their mother's womb. They're like that, right? Like Lady Thatcher, who had very sort of unconventional, non-political ways of dealing with the budget and with the men in in her cabinet. Of course, there were no women in the cabinet. That was strange. But anyway, she seemed to be able to get the men together and do exploits, and, you know, create new things, groundbreaking ideas, assembling the team, a high performing team. Okay, so when you talk about leadership in the secular world and the training world, usually if you send a guy on training, executive training, he will train you in this mode of leadership: proistemic leadership, decisive leadership, determined leadership, you know, never say die leadership. But remember, this is only one of the archetypes out of 7. There are 7 ways to lead. And you may not lead this way, but you lead in another way, right? The last one, of course, is the interventionist. And if you take a look at the idea of intervention, what is it? You're there in a crisis to stop the dominoes, you know, from affecting the other, you know. So in a way, you are the shield, you are the bodyguard. And that's how you come alive. That's your particular sort of first responder kind of genius, right? If you've seen the show Hacksaw Ridge, for example, you'll see an example of a soldier in World War II who refused to carry the rifle. He just wanted to rescue people. So you can call this an eleemosynary gift, which is the old word. You could update it with the word rescuer, is a good example of that. When you are able to actually show the ropes and mentor another person one-on-one, usually that's why. This is another example, not just the teacher and the coach, but also the mentor, this one, that's able to produce a highly sophisticated organization. If you have these Elios geniuses within, they are consistently running here and there, helter-skelter, because they're putting out fires, because they're serving by laying down their life, going into the line of fire and into the danger zone all the time in order to help other people. And of course, how they do it is by mentorship, usually one-on-one, and rescuing and orientating others who don't know how to do things. And of course, in trauma care, or in rendering direct assistance to victims in trauma, this is where their genius really comes out. You know, Francis Assisi once said, you know, preach the gospel, use words if necessary. Okay, so we've sort of spent some time this past hour or so to look at this. Let me say a few words in closing, and then run through the pattern with you. We'll not do the frequently asked questions. I think we'll reserve that for the tutorials. Okay, so now if you're listening to me at the end of 2022, when I'm making this recording, then November, December, we set aside for tutorials and mods, and that'll be every Tuesday, 5 to 7 Singapore time. Okay. So that will be the only tutorials that we'll have. The rest of your tutorials will be dealing with the other matriculation subjects. So for MODS tutorials, it'll be every Tuesday. All right. So what we want to look at is to ask the question, where do these gifts come from? And I'm not going to go into detail here, but I'm just going to broadly show you some of the anchor points, if you like. You know, in a spider web, there are certain points where you call them anchor points, where the web attaches to a tree or a rock or something, right? And if you break those anchor points, the web flies away. Well, these are the anchor points. These are some of the anchor points. One of them is in the tabernacle, right? Another one in the New Testament is in John, second John. And when you look at some of these anchor points, we looked at the one in Romans just now. We looked at one in Peter, so Paul and Peter are anchor points. And then I mentioned in the previous session that the seven churches in the book of Revelation, they're also anchor points. And the Solomon's revelation in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, that's another anchor point. And what ties all these anchor points together is they all have to do with the pattern of seven. And I'll have a whole another session, so don't particularly get bogged down in the details here. But let me just say that there are seven pieces of the tabernacle that correspond to the New Testament anchor points in terms of the gate, the altar of sacrifice, and then you have the laver, the lampstand, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, and the Ark of the Covenant. Each one of them are best represented by words that John, in his epistle, and we'll go through this at another time. But I just wanted to give you an overview to show you that there actually is a sort of a meta narrative when we talk about ecclesial gifts. So that the gate actually represents righteousness and the alignment that has to happen. And the word for that is dikaion. So if you are not aligned, you can't go through the gate, then other things, good things cannot happen. So alignment comes first. Then the second is atonement, right? So there's alignment, or the biblical word for alignment is righteousness. Once you are righteous, that means once you are calibrated to the plan of God, right? Then the atonement follows. And then from atonement comes the basic principle of law. I'm talking about principles here that are foundational. And then these laws become truth in your life, right? And they become truth in your life, these teachings. So you've got the gate, the fire altar, the laver, and then the next one is the lampstand. You can see that the alignment with the initial alignment produces layer by layer a lifestyle that moves you closer in every facet of your life to the future truth, the end point, the finishing line. That's what truth is, right? Aletheia. And then you go on to the green band, which is the table of showbread. That's opening up new conversations, right? And the truth then for you protects you and is an advocate for you. It speaks on your behalf. And, it all comes in a very neat sort of what we call a paradigm of seven in the furniture of the tabernacle, as well as in the 7 words, dikaion, hilasmos, entolas, aletheia, parklete, kleton, agape, and the last one is logon. Righteousness, atonement, law, truth, advocate, love, and word. These are expressions, again in English, very poor expressions on earth of these 7 concepts that we can see shadows of in the Old Testament. What is this general pattern or progression? You'll find it different as what we have it in Romans chapter 12, right? In Romans chapter 12, prophetia comes first. Here in the tabernacle, you have the same 7 sequence or set, the same set of 7, but the sequence is slightly reversed, or not reversed, but it's slightly in a different order or progression, right? So it's like playing a tune in one particular, using the white keys, and then you play the same tune but using the black keys. It's a different progression, but you need both, right? You need both the ebony and the ivory. It goes together. Now, in this other progression, lead comes first, because when you look at the map of the tabernacle, the gate comes first. So this one is a progression of worship. So leadership comes first. Sometimes you'll see this progression this way. In the New Testament worship, it's the same thing. When you come together, the scripture says, when you come together, somebody's got to has to call the Knesset together. That's the word come together in Hebrew. It's knes, to come together, to enter the tent together, right? Come together. Somebody has to herald the stat, as it were, right? And you can see this in recent history of Hong Kong and so on and so forth. Somebody has to stand up and preside over the team. He's got to stick his neck out. Not everybody can do this naturally, right? And so this is really the proistemic genius. Then, of course, when you come to the gate, when you come through to the gate, there's this fire altar or Holocaust altar or whole burnt offering altar. That represents, in the old days, the animal sacrificial system where you slit the throat of the lamb or the goat or whatever, and you pour out its blood, and the blood will atone for your sin, for that particular sin, right? And this is, it kind of predates Jesus hanging on the cross and bleeding out for humanity as being the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. It predates that by a couple of thousand years. But the idea is the same. The idea of atonement is encapsulated in this idea of rescue, in the sense that in the original word, the idea is mercy, the dispensing or the delivery of mercy. And that is really why you have this animal sacrificial system that was set up as a visual aid to how sins are forgiven in the old days. Now, today, in the ecclesias of the New Testament, you don't have sacrificial blood offerings, but these are substituted with hymn singing, hymns, singing, worship, that sort of thing. But it's the same idea. It's the same idea. After you come together, when you gather together, there'll be somebody who will have a hymn. And so you begin to see the progression, a slightly different order than what you have in Romans. You have it in 1 Corinthians 14:26. In that verse, that single verse, 1 Corinthians 14:26, in one verse, you have all 7 modal excellences or expressions of them. The second one is in this idea of, someone having a hymn to commemorate the victory that Christ has won on the cross. The elemental genius of the Elios is seen in this compassion, empathy, wanting to staunch the bleeding and alleviate the pain. In rugby, you have, and many sports, team sports, you do have a position. They are called the positionless position. They have no position, and they're just everywhere. And usually, they win the best player award. Sometimes they're the captain because they can play both offense and defense. Okay, the next aspect of this paradigm is the teaching aspect. It's symbolized by the laver. Remember that sort of basin of water where the priest washes his hand. The idea of washing. That's what teaching does. It kind of washes your soul. That's why after worship, there's always a word of instruction. So in 1 Corinthians 14:26, you have this idea of a word of instruction that sort of clarifies and sort of gives you the meta narrative of what's going on, the big picture, as well as the details. So if you can take a more discrete approach to revelation, you'll find that this pattern of 7 is everywhere, actually. It began in the garden, the 7 days of creation. It continued on in the wilderness, in the tabernacle, the construction of the tabernacle after Israel came out of Egypt. And it's seen in Solomon. It's seen in the early church, the 7 churches. It's seen in the 7 natural endowments that Adam was given, Adam and Eve. They were created good, but they kept having to go back to God, of course, right? And it's seen in the ecclesial archetypes. And it's seen here also in 1 Corinthians 14:26. So when you come together, somebody has a hymn, somebody has a word of instruction, somebody has a revelation. So this idea is prismatic revelation. That means it's members of the body of Christ. Some of them have this ability when light comes through, white light comes through, they're able to sort of parse and see something that is not obvious to everybody else. And of course, sometimes you call them heretics, right? And sometimes we burn the heretics, and they see some aspect, and it makes the rest of the body of Christ very uncomfortable. And especially when they speak it out in a way that may not be palatable. They haven't found a way to communicate properly, right? And so you want to throw them over the cliff or under the bus or something like that. They can be very contrarian in their view, and you need to know how to manage them. And if you're a prophetia, you need to know how to manage your own blind spots, because every one of these gifts have their own related blind spots. Okay, so the word in Greek here it's not prophetia, but it's apocalypsis. And you can hear, the word for what we call the technical term for the book of Revelation. It's the apocalypse. It's apocalyptic literature, meaning that it uncovers something, not necessarily in the future, but it uncovers something about the connection between the past, the present, and the future. And usually it overturns paradigms. It shifts the paradigms so that, in the Old Testament tabernacle, this was embodied or symbolized through the menorah, the 7-branch menorah, which gives light in a dark place so that you can see everything else, right? And of course, in some sense, God is light. So the lampstand, the feature of the lampstand is that they take the light from the source and then they share it out to others. That's the proper way. And actually, if it's done correctly, it will be of great benefit to the body of Christ, because it brings a tremendous amount of hope in some way, because you're speaking future truths. You're seeing the future even before its fullness comes about, right? It's the inauguration of the future that is interesting. In other words, when the lampstand shines, and when the prophetess speaks, and when the revelation is unfolded, it's kind of like what we call the beginning, the front end of future, not the back end, but it's the front end of the future, and it gives hope to those who hear. Now, the next stage, or the next piece of the furniture in the tabernacle, is the table of showbread. And it's the only piece of furniture where God and man at table sits down for a meal, right? That's the symbolism there. It's the table of fresh bread, or showbread. It's miraculously that the bread doesn't go stale in the presence of the Lord, right? But bread also symbolizes a conversation, right? How new ideas are birthed, even in the midst where you get to a cul-de-sac in your life, or perhaps a stalemate situation where it's an impasse. You can't break through. Well, this is where this encouragement comes. That's really what encouragement is. It's a spoken word. It's symbolized by the mouth, or the tongue that eats this bread, sits down. It's the idea that you break bread together. There's a community of fresh ideas, and it encourages you to finish what you started, to press on to the end and not give up. Okay, so the table of showbread in the holy place is kind of like illuminated by the lampstand, and it comes before the incense altar and before the ark. It's that sort of nexus, or place of intersection between Uranos and Anthropos coming together. And as long as Anthropos submits to Uranos, that means man is under God. They said, I think it was in the American currency, they put their one nation under God. That's the proper. When you come to the table, it's not to negotiate as an equal, but it's to come to eat at the table and to demonstrate loyalty to the Father of lights and to the Almighty, the Jehovah Jesus. He rules, he's sovereign over all. You don't go there to negotiate anything, actually, but in a way, he allows you in to get a peek at what is yet to come, and to fellowship, and for there to be intimacy between God and man. So this is an aspect that's much needed, and you can see this in the whole area of counseling and coaching. This is a huge impact, because everybody, nowadays they call it therapists, and you pay a lot of money for this kind of thing. But actually, there are some people who are just gifted in this area, that if you ever, feel down and out, you just buy them a cup of coffee, and within 15 minutes, the whole mood changes. And if you give a microphone for people like this, they can actually influence the entire stadium full of people. I'm not talking about telling jokes, or being a stand-up comedian, but I'm saying that there is some natural proclivity to see something from a positive point of view, and that is very reassuring somehow, that you're going to make it through. Don't give up, and that sort of thing. Never give up. And you can see, although people like Churchill and the great orators, they were not elementally a parakleo, right? They were this was, however, their technique, their ability. Like Churchill, it was said that he commandeered the English language and sent it to war. That's really the genius of the English people, in a way, or of anyone who can debate, right? You have to commandeer the language and make it useful for your purpose. That's what the paraclectic genius is. And you find this all over Scripture, right from the very page one, right from the very beginning. God, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and God said, "Let there be light." If you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, you'll find a little ditty there. It says that the hand, or the eye, he says the eye cannot say to the hand, "I don't need you." In just that short pericope, he actually mentions three modalities: the eye, the mouth, the tongue, and the hand, right? So that's the prophetia, the parakleo, and the diakonia. The eye cannot say to the hand. That's three, right? And he goes on, and you can see all the different body parts here. So this one has to do with the conversationalist, the potentialist, the table of showbread, right? So it's not obvious, but it's discrete. By looking at these different pieces of furniture in the Old Testament under Moses in Exodus 25 and Exodus 40, and see their corresponding anchor points in the New Testament, as well as quite a fascinating study, and we'll look at the pattern of 7 in detail. Then you have this table of incense, or altar of incense. This is a fire, but it's different from the outside fire. That one is for, whole burnt offering. This one is of fragrant spices and aromatherapy, kind of aromatherapy, but it's a special ingredient that was burned as incense, and you're not supposed to copy that for any other perfumes and things like that, under pain of death, kind of thing. And so when it's burned, it produces a nice odor or a fragrance into the nostril of God. And in the Old Testament, of course, we have this is talking about prayer, isn't it, in the New Testament? But more than that, it's not just prayer in a verbal sense. It's kind of execution. When we pray, Jesus said, if you ask anything if it's according to the will of God, you shall receive it, right? So you can be sure that prayer is not just a verbal expression of, gibberish under an ecstatic situation. It's very intentional. It's very, it's full of understanding exactly what the Lord wants. And you're agreeing with what God wants. And that is the idea behind the altar of incense, that you're burning the incense in sync with what God is doing, and you're saying yes and amen. And the idea has come to us into our world today is the word execution, which you can see in every place where, where there's excellence. There's always some kind of a execution. Like in Formula One, for example, you see, these guys in the pit crew, they are highly polished and highly practiced at what they do. And of course, under different stress conditions, and if it's raining or confusion reigns or whatever, they bring out the wrong tire or they bring out the wrong piece of equipment. And it's like everybody's shocked, or they mistime things, and the driver, accelerates and the patrol hose is still linked to the car, something like that. We saw that in the Singapore Formula One recently. Lots of chaotic things can happen, but if it is well rehearsed, it's actually artistry. It's like a song that they play, and every part is, having a part to play, and they do it with great finesse and artisanal, almost like a artistry. Okay, so that's what we mean by serving the Lord, or serving the King, or serving in the civil service, for example. That's what it's supposed to be: service with excellence, doing the best, that sort of thing. And then as you get right deep into the Holy of Holies, remember we're going into the sanctum, which the holiest place in the tabernacle, which the priest only goes once a year, the high priest. And so now as we go into that, we recognize what is inside that place. It's the Ark of the Covenant. And what's inside the Ark is important, right? Authority and legality and sustainability. Those are the three principles behind the staff of Aaron, and the manna that never goes bad or rancid, and the table of the laws, that's legality, right? The 10 Commandments. So this box, or this ark, gold covered ark, portable, it's a symbol of basically it's a symbol where God's mercy seat is. His presence is there, and he sees all, he knows all, and everything is within his control and under his control. We say that God is on his throne. He has the whole world in his hands, as it were. That's why we can sleep at night. Okay, we don't have to be worried or depressed or whatever, because God holds us in the palms of his hands. This idea of it is expressed in the last bit of 1 Corinthians 14:26. He says, when you come together, that's leadership, right? Each one of you has a hymn that's talking about the atonement, has a word of instruction that's talking about teaching or learning, has an apocalypsis, that's a revelation that's talking about, the prismatic understanding of where we are in time and so on and so forth, in place. Each one of you has a tongue it's talking about the communication of open heavens and open womb, right? And the depositing of the God gene, as it were, within your soul. And then someone would have an interpretation. It's hermeneutic is the word. It's talking about the execution of the will of God. And then he ends with this statement, let all things be done for the building up. And that word building up is the word oikodomea, which is comprised of two words. Oikos means house, And domain is the root word for domain, or, like if you have a domain name, right? Or domination or dominion, right? All of these words. And so when you have this house dominion, that means you have what you're about is building up of the house, and the idea of a God who is actually at the center of the universe, and he's sort of directing traffic, as in like a control tower. That's the idea behind total and full resources. So, for example, we may not know why the scientists have discovered, for example, like in the picture here, the ability to extract natural gas and oil from subterranean shale, right? They have discovered a way of micro explosions to release certain gases and petroleum and so on and so crude and all that. We might be quite alarmed at the dangers there may be to the environment and so on and so forth, producing these sort of mini earthquakes underneath the ground. And yet, we also don't know whether these advances in science may actually have a part to play in the future, when natural resources may actually be depleted elsewhere and wars and rumors of wars begin and so on and so forth. Like what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, apparently it's not just so simple of land grabbing alone or domination. It's also got to do with resources and oil supply and all that, supply and demand. So when you see the totality of what's going on in the newspapers and so on and so forth, and what's going on behind the scenes in terms of governments and politicians and political parties and all this kind of thing, you are tempted to think that, well, is anyone in control anymore? Well, the answer is yes, somebody is in control. It's just that the intelligence level is much higher than Bill Gates or Donald Trump or Warren Buffett, right? We're talking about God Almighty. He's the creator of heaven and earth. He knows what he's doing. He wrote the playbook, and he has gifted certain individuals, and we need to recognize these different metadynamic gifts. And of course, the most obvious metadynamic gift is if you're a man and you're married man, then is your wife, because she wears this hat, regardless of what her elemental truth is. Every wife wears the hat of the metadynamic. She is the Holy of Holies. Nobody goes in there and touches her. This is the special sort of whole sacred sanctum, the inner sanctum of the marriage, which is the wife. No, I mean, the man has to play many roles, including the leader role. That's his hat, regardless of his elemental. But for the wife, she's the magisterial. And so all resources come under her. And that really, she's been anointed and gifted in this area. That's why, I really can't understand men who they don't recognize the value living right under their own roof. If only we had eyes to see and appreciate these things. So when we've come to the end of this session, it's been a little bit longer session, even though we only had 22 slides. I thought I needed to go through a little bit on the details of the default natural abilities and the traits, the different traits. Now, we do have some frequently asked questions, but I'm going to leave that to the tutorial session. So, shalom, shalom. This is the end of the session. God bless you, and see you next time for